It's just the freedom, the safety, the security aspect. To be able to not worry about whether someone's going to break into your house or you're going to get hijacked when you're driving on the road. And as a father and as a husband, that's a priority. So that's a great part about being in Australia, is that you have that bit more safety, and being in Australia, people don't look down upon you based on the car that you drive, the house that you live in, and the job that you do or don't do.
Hello world, wake me up to another good morning, time to go. Oh, we are all looking for adventure.
Before we continue with the episode, I just quickly wanted to jump in here to let you know that we are going to run a very interesting webinar pretty soon this week. And I suggest that you get onto our notifications as soon as possible. What's it about? Well, my friend, I'm going to tell you about the 3 biggest mistakes that migrants make and what you can do about it so that you don't make those same mistakes. I'm also going to tell you about the 3 secrets that successful migrants do. I'm going to let you in on them. And whether you should use an agent or not, if you want to apply for a visa, can you do it on your own or not, and how to land that perfect job down under so that you can make your way over to this amazing country as soon as possible. How can you do that? You can hop onto chamonixtv.com.au/register to pick a time and join us on the webinar. All right, my friend, let's jump into the episode.
Hi, Myan. Thank you so much for joining us today, all the way from sunny Perth. How are you going?
Oh, fantastic. Great to be with you guys. Thank you so much.
It is an absolute pleasure to have you here. And I know that you have almost lived all around the world to find yourself in Australia at this point in time. Please give us a bit of a breakdown of your journey from where you were born until where you find yourself right now.
Well, the long and the short is I was born in Durban, and then at the age of 25, immigrated to New Zealand in the year 2000. Spent 12 years in New Zealand, and then felt that, fate, or there's a call of God to go back to South Africa. We're based in Pretoria from 2012 to 2019, and then back to New Zealand for almost 2 years. And then at the end of 2020, in November, I made the move across the ditch, as the Aussies and Kiwis say, and I pastored a church in New South Wales for 2 years. And then last year, December, I'm now, as you said, in sunny Western Australia, Perth. Or I like to call it from Pretoria to Perthoria.
Perthoria. That's a good one. And why did you move, firstly, from South Africa to New Zealand? Let's take it in steps. We'll get the first one and then the second one.
Well, I think, if your audience has South Africans listening, then it's what I'm going to share isn't something uncommon. I was held up at gunpoint in Durban in the year 2000, and that sort of really shook the system. I was in business. I was an accountant. I had my own financial advisory company as a broker as well, with well-known South African companies. But, with all of that, being held up at gunpoint was really giving me a shake up, because you get so caught up in making a living that you forget to live. You have no time to live, and that's what happened to me, making a living but no time to live, busy. And that day, staring around the barrel of a 357 Magnum, which is not an ice cream but a big gun, life becomes pretty sobering. And that's when I really believe that I had the call that I needed to move out of South Africa, because really, until a South African has that near-death experience, it's very hard to leave South Africa, because yes, we've got our challenges living in South Africa, but the lifestyle with all the luxurious materialism is very hard to let go of. So that being held up at gunpoint was really the sort of catalyst that caused me to leave New Zealand, to South Africa to New Zealand. And when I got to New Zealand, the plan was to live off the sales from the business. But one small problem: the guys who bought the business didn't pay me, And now I'm in New Zealand with no money, my wife and our 8-month-old daughter. And that's when, it was a tragedy again.
Good golly. So did you call up the guy in South Africa and say, hey, mate, pass my geld? What's
Yeah.
up?
There was a few of them because, with the business, I had the accounting side and I had in South African terms, we say short-term insurance, and I had the life and investment. So there were about 3 people that pretty much took advantage of the fact that I had immigrated. I was no longer in the country. But through that, as we were chatting off camera, our faith doesn't waver. And it was through that experiences that all things began to work together for good, because as South Africans would know, we get so used to our materialism. And my first job in New Zealand, from having my own business in South Africa, a house on the beach in Durban, people working for me, was working in Burger King. In Australia, it's Hungry Jack's. And Shamanix, I wasn't a director or a manager. I had to start off, cleaning the floors, cleaning the toilets. But before I made the burgers, I washed my hands just to let them know. And when I speak to Aussies and Kiwis, I got to explain that for them, cleaning floors and toilets and all of that, that's not a problem. It's part of the job, you do it. But for a South African who's been brought up on that mentality where the culture judges people based on the car that they drive, the house that they live in, the salary that they earn, and even more so as an Indian, having been grown up in a Hindu home, exposed to the caste system. My mother never missed an opportunity to teach us a lesson as children. When we drive past someone cleaning the sweeping the streets, she'd say to us, if you don't do well in school, if you don't go to university, get a good job, you can end up sweeping the streets. Now, let's be honest, in my mother's eyes, if the street sweeper was down here, can you imagine where the toilet cleaner was? Definitely not up there. So, I had to go through those, I had to relearn, I had to unlearn, the garbage that we were brought up with in South Africa. Yeah. That is not based on your material standing in society. That's where it really started for me in Burger King as such, and really learning the value of life. I mean, I was glad that I was alive, and just enjoyed that part of it.
Did you arrive in New Zealand with citizenship? With a permanent residency?
No, I didn't. I started studying as a teacher. There was a huge change. I changed vocation. I started studying as a teacher, and I was on a student visa and a work permit. At that time, you could only work 15 hours a week. My wife couldn't work. And, it was a real challenge. I had like about 3 jobs, Burger King, packing shelves at night in Woolworths. And I always joke and I say to people, if you go to a store and you take something out of the shelf and you don't need it, please don't leave it at the till, go put it back in the shelf, because that was my job doing my fill. And then I at any given stage, I had about 3 jobs. I kept 3 jobs at any given stage.
Just because you wanted to make a living and stay in Australia, didn't want to go back to South Africa?
No, I mean, I was suffering from post-traumatic stress. So, it was definitely something that I didn't want to go back to. I made a joke 2 weeks ago. I spoke at a church here in Australia, and I said, you Australians really don't know what it's like to go through being held up at gunpoint like a South African. But you probably would have had post-traumatic stress. If I remember during COVID times, it was like when you guys ran out of toilet paper, that sort of thing.
Didn't I wonder with the people in South Africa, didn't they ever run out of toilet paper with COVID?
But at that stage I was living in New Zealand. We were in New Zealand when lockdown happened, and it was such a big joke because even my mates in South Africa were like, what's happening to the Aussies? They're fighting over toilet paper.
Oh, it's so fun. One of the mysteries of COVID. So tell me, Myan, you moved from South Africa to New Zealand. You started down at the bottom, as you were just explaining to us, as it happens for a lot of people. You worked yourself up, I guess, from Hungry Jack's. You didn't eat yourself up the ladder. You worked yourself up the ladder, I'm assuming. What job did you do after that? Or where did life take you from there on?
Well, you see, I was starting to become a teacher, and I was training in a Christian university to teach both in a public school and in a Christian school. And one of the requirements in New Zealand was that, if you wanted to teach Maori, you had to learn it from the Maori. So we had to go to a Maori community place called a marae. And on that marae, the Maori elders asked us to bring a greeting in our mother tongue. And this was 2001. And I had grown up in Durban, where rugby and Afrikaans were things that I didn't like. And I said to the Maori elder, I said, hey, mate, I don't speak any Indian. And he goes, no, but I know you speak Afrikaans. And I'm like, yes. I'm like, Afrikaans is an evil language. And he goes, why is that? I said, no, we only spoke it in the school, not outside of the school, because shamanics, everyone in South Africa, black, blue, green, yellow, you all learned Afrikaans. And I learned it from standard 1 to metric. En ek het suiwer Afrikaans geleer, nie hierdie komplex Afrikaans nie, yeah? And he doesn't leave it there. Being a Christian, he goes and he opens up the Bible. And he reads to me out of Philippians chapter 2, verses 8 to 11, where it says, every knee shall bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. And then he asked me the question, he says, if the Bible says every tongue shall confess, how can you tell me there's evil in a language? And I believe on that marae in Auckland, New Zealand in 2001, the skiller, the oogklapper, the scales and the stronghold over my heart was broken. Because for the first time in my life, I spoke Afrikaans with real freedom and joy. And every time I met a South African, I spoke to them in Afrikaans. And being someone that, looked at Afrikaans as the taal van die onderdrukker, the language of the oppressor, and rugby as the sport of the oppressor, was it coincidental? After that, within a year, God brings All Blacks across my path, famous All Blacks. Inga, the winger, Tui Gamala, Michael Jones, Ronnie Clark, DJ Forbes, and we become great friends. And I begin learning rugby from them. My knowledge of rugby went from 0 to 100 very quickly. And long story short, I ended up writing Inga, the winger, Tui Gamala's autobiography. I go to England, I interview his teammates, Johnny Wilkinson, Jason Robinson, Rob Andrew. I mean, this Indian lighty from Durban who hated rugby is getting the red carpet tour around Twickenham by Rob Andrew. I come back in New Zealand, I write the book in 2009. It's a bestseller. The Bulls rugby team from Pretoria are touring Auckland in 2010. I sent a copy of Inga's book to P.S. Peace because we heard that P.S. Peace was a Christian. And I get a response from the Bulls business manager, a guy named Ian Schwartz, to say, we're actually going to be in Auckland over Easter weekend. Please keep in touch with us. We'd love for you to come and visit the team and have a chat with us. And I did that. So it was April. The Bulls came over to play the Blues. They came to play them on the Saturday of the Easter weekend. I got in touch with them on the Thursday. I got invited to the team hotel. And we got on like a house on fire, P.S. Peace and I, and the Frans Lurke, Victor Matfield, Fourie Dupree, Morne Steyn, all the Bulls players. And I asked him, I said, hey guys, what are you doing tomorrow? Because tomorrow was Good Friday. And they go, well, normally we're on tour. We don't go to church. I said, well, would you like to come to church? And I got them all to come to our church in Auckland on Good Friday. And can you imagine that, it was only going to be like 2 or 3 players. But when I got to the hotel, it was pretty much the whole team.
Wow.
Victor, Fourie, Flip van der Merwe, Zane Kirstner, Werner Krier, and all the coaches. Frans Lurke, Slap Chips, Peter Rousseau was a backline coach. He came, Johan van Graan. And imagine walking into this church in Auckland where they're rugby mad. And yes, pretty much the whole Springbok team is there. And I remembered getting Victor and seating him in the front row. And I said, Victor Matfield, I say, bro, ek is jammer. Ek weet, jy speel in die tweede lijn. You're a second rower, but please sit in the front row. And then the pastor was absolutely shocked because the year before, Morne Steyn kicked the 60-meter penalty to beat the British and Irish Lions. So as the pastor is preaching, he looks in the crowd and he says, you that kicker that kicked the ball 60 meters. And he goes, yeah, Morne Steyn. He says, you know what? I said to my wife, if I'm ever short of 3 points to get to heaven, I'm going to get that guy to kick for me. So it was a real blessed time. And, through that, I went down with the Bulls to Hamilton. They played the Chiefs. I became very good friends with all the players and the coaches. And that culminated in me writing P.S. Peace's book. That was a bestseller. I got invited back to South Africa at the end of 2011 on a holiday. And that holiday ended up being 7 years, where I was offered a role with the University of Pretoria as an assistant director and linked in with the Bulls rugby as well.
So wait a second. Did you did you quit your job, obviously New Zealand, with the intention to go back to South Africa for an extended period of time, or did you?
Nah, this was net
I'll just go
vakantie, net
write the
vakantie. I
book.
was going on holiday because I needed to launch. I was asked to come back at the end of 2011 to launch Pierre's book. So we took an extended holiday. No intention of living back in South Africa. A funny story, I must tell you this. So we do Pierre's launch at a church in Pretoria, and I didn't know that there was a reporter in the crowd. So when Pierre's uncle introduced me and said, hey, here's Pierre's skrywer, and everything is in Afrikaans now. Here's Pierre's skrywer. And then I got up to stand up, and people were shocked because, you could see, they're like, wow, wait, this guy's an Indian guy. How did he write Pierre's book? So I said to them, ek sien julle Afrikaanse mense is 'n bietjie verbaas en julle wil weet hoe is dit moontlik 'n Indo-Europees se boek geskryf het. So ek sê vir julle sê, julle almal weet 'n boer maak 'n plan, ja, maar wat julle weet nie is dat 'n boer maak 'n plan, maar jy nodig 'n indier om dit te verkoop. You know? And that line, a boer makes a plan, but you need an Indian to sell it. The next day in the Beeld, on the third page, there was a reporter there, Niels Jackson, in the crowd. And he wrote headlines, Pierre's skrywer, boer makes a plan, but you need an Indian to sell it. There was a director at the University of Pretoria, rugby mad, gets in touch with Pierre's uncle. And Pierre's uncle says to me, hey, this guy wants to have a coffee with you. And I said, hey, Wilm, you know what, I'm heading to Durban because, we're from Durban. Pretoria is not our town now. And he said, no, please go have a coffee with this guy. He's a real good friend. He's a director at the university. So I said, okay. So I left my wife and the kids at the Brooklyn Mall because that's what you do to make your wife happy. You leave at the mall. So the nearest mall to Tucky's was the Brooklyn Mall. And I go to have coffee with this director. So he's asking me about the All Blacks, my involvement with the All Blacks. And then the conversation turns to my academic background because I lectured in New Zealand. After I did my teacher studies, I got a postgraduate degree and I did business lecturing and stuff like that there. En ek sê, lekker om te gesels, maar jy weet wat, ek moet na Durban toe ry. Thank you very much for the coffee. And he goes, no, it's alles is reg. Die werk is joune. So ek sê, excuse me. And he said, no, this was an interview. I said, what interview? He said, no, we've been looking for a director, assistant director, who can also work with the Bulls and be part of the university. And I've been praying for a whole year. And I believe that you are the guy, so I'm happy to give you the job.
Wow.
So now, Chamonix. If you live outside of South Africa, we were in New Zealand for 11 years. There was no way my wife was going to agree to go back to South Africa. She was my get out of jail free card. So I said to him, Mom, dankie, bye, dankie. Maar ek moet met my vrou gesels. I got to talk to my wife. And he goes, no problem. I'll give you a few days, think about it. And I'm driving back to the Brooklyn Mall. Now, when I wrote my book about my conversion from Hinduism to Christianity, I found out for the first time that my first forefathers that arrived in Durban in 1860 from India worked on a sugar farm called Makalnyuk Sugar Estates in Durban.
Yeah.
And now I'm driving from Tucky's to the Brooklyn Mall, and I'm saying, God, what do I do? Do I come back to South Africa or do I stay in New Zealand? You tell me what to do. And Chamonix, for the people that know Pretoria, as I'm driving to the Brooklyn Mall from the university, there's a pad teken. There's a road sign of that area that flashes in front of me, and it's called New Makalnyuk. Now, my ancestors from India worked on a farm in Durban called Makalnyuk Sugar Estate. And now here's a sign, New Makalnyuk. I got to tell you, it was snot and trana. There was a presence of, there was a huge presence of God in the car. And I had to pull off to the side and I'm crying like a baby. And I'm saying, God, what is happening? And then, the Lord says to me, I sent your forefathers in South Africa I sent your forefathers from India to South Africa in 1860 for a new beginning to Makalnyuk Sugar Estate. And then he says, I sent you to New Zealand for almost 12 years for two reasons. To learn rugby and to get rid of your negative attitude towards Afrikaans, so that I can send you back to South Africa as a seëndeling, specific for my Afrikaner volk, and die land om hulle te herinner, to remember that I've not forgotten them. I've not forgotten South Africa. And that was a message. And I said, okay, God, pretty much, yeah, it's getting all misty here. I said, if this is you, then you got to talk to Jolene, my wife, and we got to be in agreement, because I don't think she's gonna like coming back to South Africa, because she's happy being safe, being able to enjoy the benefits of living in New Zealand. Chamonix, literally, when I went to the Brooklyn Mall, Jolene asked me, how was the interview? I said, you won't believe it. This guy offered me a job. Literally, Jolene's next words were, I hope you took it. And I was like, what? What did you say? And she goes, well, you know what? I just feel when you were gone there, I just felt that, it would be good if we could come back. And I felt that, you're going to get offered the job. And she said, it's good that we come back. And that 2012, it ended up being 7 years. Through that experience, I've spoken in nearly every NG church in the country, AGS churches, Afrikaans. God opened up doors. I even worked with the Lions rugby team. At that time, they were relegated from Super Rugby. They were in really tough times. And I go to them. And I didn't do an interview. I did a talk at the coach Johan Ackerman's church in Pretoria, Levende Woord. And that's where I was a guest speaker with him. And also, my favorite Afrikaans liggie is the one, Lig jou hande na bo, sing hallelujah. You know who sings that one? Juanita du Plessis. And you won't believe it, she was a guest speaker as well. And I said to her, Juanita, I said, I loved your song. So she gave me a CD and I gave her my book, 'n Boermagge Plan, maar jy nodig indier om dit te verkoop. And after that talk, Johan Ackerman, the Lions coach, approaches me to come and help them, because they were relegated. They were not in a good place. And I started the Lions in 2013. And one of the first things I said to them was, you guys are in Tamati Straat. And the young Afrikaans guys didn't know what it meant. And I said, now the Indian needs to teach you Afrikaans. Because I learned when an Afrikaner is in trouble, you say, hey, het in Tamati Straat beland. So I said, but don't worry, because we Indian people like tomatoes to make curry. So wait there, ek sal julle kom haal en 'n paar tomaties huis toe vat om to make curry. So that became the joke. So when I wrote this book about what I did with the Lions, that was the punchline. And that was my second Afrikaans book. And the Lions ended up getting back into Super Rugby. But more than that, the principles and the values that I had learned with the All Blacks, I was able to infuse that with them, and the culture. And through that, because the Lions were not a very successful team in Super Rugby, but after that, God was able to work with them, and people began to see the change. And I would go around the country and people were like, wow, the Lions is now my second team, there's something special. And I said, well, that's what it took, where they needed to be encouraged to know that there were 3 words that the Lord laid on my heart when I went to them. In English, it was rejection, direction, and resurrection. Because that's what happened to me. I got held up at gunpoint, rejection. I lost the business, rejection. But in New Zealand, God gave me the direction. And the direction was rugby and Afrikaans. And that led to my resurrection. And even in Afrikaans, it rhymes. Verwerping, rigting, and opstanding. And through that, the doors got opened for me around the country. I even did some work with the Springbok players, the Protea cricket players, the Bafana. I was based at the University of Pretoria, the High Performance Center. And through that, again, schools, businesses, because I was tweetalig, and I had a testimony that, God doesn't divide us based on our skin color and our language. That's supposed to bring us together. And that's the message that I carry with me, for people that move over to a new country and things like that there. Yes, you can't change the past, but you can learn from it. And it doesn't mean that you forget where you come from and who you are. And, my latest book, I think I shared with you earlier, is Van Burgerskap to Van Burgersmark tot Burgerskap. And the message comes from working in Burger King, making burgers. And last year I did a talk at Afrikaans Manna Ontbyt in Auckland. And I said to them in Afrikaans, I said, jy weet wat, ons moenie ons identiteit vergeet nie. Ja, ek is gebore in Suid-Afrika, ek het New Zealand burgerskap en my voorvaders het van India gekom het, maar ek het geleer dat my burgerskap is in die hemel. Filippense 3:20. Dit wat die woord sê vir ons. And then I say to them, maar ek het my identiteit gevind toe ek burgers gemaak het. Omdat toe ek die burgers gemaak het, ek het geleer dat my burgerskap is in die hemel. You know, burgers maak burgerskap. And I turned around to the Dominee, Danny Murray, and I said, Dominee Danny, ek het die titel van my volgende Afrikaans boek, van burgers maak tot burgerskap. It only makes sense in Afrikaans. And this is what the book is about. And you can see I've even said there, I've got a picture of a bunny chow, and I'm saying rechte curry cup. Because how many Indian people do you see playing in the curry cup, Shamani? You know, it's a lie.
Yeah.
So maybe your viewers can help me change the name of the curry cup to a name that best suits the people that play in it. So I've got 3 choices. They can either call it the Burvos beker, the Potjie beker, or the Biltong beker. All right?
Oh, so funny. I love how you play with words, Myan. You're really good with it. And that brings me to a question I was wondering. When you left South Africa and you went to New Zealand, you obviously wrote your first autobiography for the rugby players, but what led you to start writing? Where did you write in South Africa? Were you a writer previously?
Except writing love letters to my wife when we were courting. You know, I love reading. I love writing in school and stuff. But I wasn't a professional writer as such at the time. But that all changed when I went to New Zealand and I lost the business, and I'm in Burger King, literally on my hands and knees, you know, cleaning the floors and toilets. And I said, God, why am I here? And that's when I believe, you know, the title of my first book was impressed upon my heart, From the Pit to the Palace. And I said, Lord, what do you mean from the pit to the palace? And I heard very, very strongly the impression, what I did for Joseph, I'm going to do for you. I'm going to take you from the pit to the palace. And, you know, what resonated a lot with the story of Joseph in my life was, you know, Joseph's own brothers threw him in the pit. And for me, the people that bought my business that didn't pay me were my family. You know, they didn't pay me. And I had to learn that lesson of Joseph. And that's why, you know, my favorite verse in the Bible is Genesis 50:20. And if your listeners and your viewers can remember anything in this message, it's that verse, Genesis 50:20, when Joseph is now the prime minister of Egypt, having been sold into slavery by his brothers, you know, thrown into the pit. He's now the prime minister. And the same brothers that did that to him now come before him. They don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. And he says, I'm Joseph, your brother. Now, can you imagine how scared they would have been? Because he could have done that and the soldiers in Egypt would have killed his brothers. But he says, no, I'm not going to kill you. And then from being afraid, the brothers then become senuweeagtig. They become nervous, inquisitive, you know, nieuwsgierig. They become nieuwsgierig. How is it that you are now the prime minister of Egypt? We thought we destroyed your dreams and the plans that God had for you when we threw you in the pit and sold you off as a slave. And Genesis 50:20, Joseph answers them and said, what you intended for evil, God has turned it around for good, for the saving of many lives. And I had a bit of a, you know, a little laugh, because I was speaking in an Afrikaans church and I said, you know, if Joseph was an Afrikaner and he only had one word to answer his brothers, when they asked him, how is it possible that we did not destroy the dreams and the plans that God had for you in your life? Joseph would have responded, on statebaar. On statebaar. Die planne, die drome, wat die Here het vir ek en jy, is onstatebaar. No one, no people, no circumstances, nothing can stop the plans that God has for you. And this is why I say they are unstoppable. So my encouragement to people that have, you know, left South Africa or left whatever countries they've had and they've moved over and they're finding it hard, they're challenged with everything, you know, hold on to your faith, keep believing in that God has a plan for you and that the plan God has for you is unstoppable. I left South Africa as an accountant, as an insurance broker. I'm not that anymore. You know, God has used me to work with All Blacks, the Springboks, and all around the world, and do all of that to remind me and to encourage others that when you're in Tamati Strat, take the tamatis and make curry with it. Take the lemons and make lemonade, and don't ever give up in what God has got for you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love it. And it's such a nice word, onstuitbaar. It's something about that word that's, the Afrikaans language has got a different, surely you would appreciate the Afrikaans language by now, because you're so good with using words, and there are some words that just say so easily. We always find it funny how when we speak to English-speaking South Africans, they always say, oh, and they speak in English, and then they say, yeah, everything, it's very lekker, and we like to drink this, and it's lekker, and we like to go to these places or whatever, it's lekker, they always say lekker. And then when you speak to Afrikaans people, you know what they do? They say nice. Ja, ons hou daarvan, is baie nice.
Well, you know what?
Funny how we swap the two.
When I put this cover together, I describe the cover because of the bunny chow. I describe the cover as how my Afrikaner friends describe the English. They say the English is delicious. So I say the cover is very delicious. So I hear what you're saying, because on that note, I was doing a talk in the Karoo in Eastern Cape, Middelburg, and they only speak Afrikaans there. So I was speaking at a church and a school. So the people we were staying with, the guy had just started doing some chaplain work in the local primary school in English. So I get there and he said, hey, ek is so blij dat jy is hier, omdat ek kan die oefening doen vir my Engels. So ek sal met jou in Engels praat, maar jy kan met my in Afrikaans praat. So I said, no problem. And he said, can you speak to me in English? So he wanted to practice his English. So he knew now that I was working at the University of Pretoria. And then he says to me, he said, hey, my son is studying at Tucky's as well. And I said, oh, good, man. What is he studying for? He said, no, he's studying to become a vegetarian. Right. So I didn't want to embarrass him. And I'm like, oh, yeah, nice, man. So vegetarian. All right. So which campus is that? Which campus is that on? And he goes, he's in Onderstepoort. I said, oh, he's studying to become a veterinarian. And that's a true story, eh? That's a true story.
No, that's funny. I wouldn't say that I haven't made similar mistakes in the past. In Australia, being Afrikaans speaking, grown up, and I have an Afrikaans husband. My children speak fluently Afrikaans, even though they were born here.
Well done.
I still find myself making so many mistakes after 18 years. I mean, English comes naturally to me, yes. However, Afrikaans is my first language. I still find myself, when I speak sometimes to Australians, I speak in English and then somehow an Afrikaans word jumps into the sentence and I finish the sentence without realizing that's an Afrikaans word as I'm saying it. And at the end of the sentence, I realized, whoops, there was an Afrikaans word in the middle of the sentence. And I'm thinking, this is while I'm talking, thinking, I don't think these people are going to understand what I'm saying. And I just keep going. And you can see they sort of start frowning and then they keep going. Maybe they just think they didn't understand all the English I was using. But meanwhile, I had an Afrikaans word in there and I'll just keep going. And, finally, in the end, I understand. But yes, after 8 years.
On that note, I just want to encourage Afrikaners that, I speak to a lot of them around the country, and this is where also, with the book about your identity, is don't be ashamed of the language, because I know there's a lot of South Africans that I've met in New Zealand and Australia that don't want to teach their kids Afrikaans because they say that they're now in Australia or they're in New Zealand and they want them to grow up speaking English, and that's fine, but that's part of who you are. That's your identity. I mean, coming from an Indian, I teach my kids Afrikaans. If you go onto YouTube and Facebook, you'll see them doing a declaration in Afrikaans as well, because we don't speak any Indian. And, but we come from South Africa. That's part of who we are. We fellowship in a South African church here that has Afrikaans and English services. I sit in the middle so that I can hear both the English and Afrikaans, but the family is in just today. If you go onto my Facebook, I took a photograph with the Dominee there because they had a special on boerewors. So I held up the boerewors and I said, it's so good to fellowship in a South African church because you don't just get your daily word, you also get your daily wors. So I took off the D and I put an S there. So another play on words. that's a culture that we have, where I want to encourage South Africans, don't forget, yes, we've had a bad past, apartheid and all of that was bad, but, let's join hands. Let's join hands today and let's make a new positive, difference for the future. Because you're also listening to the only Indian that has done two gelofte fees praatjies. I was a guest speaker at two gelofte fees. One was in Kroonstad. And I remember after I did the talk, there's an old man that got up in front of everyone. And, with snot and trana, he gave me a drukkie. And he said to me, forgive my people for what they've done to your people. And I answered him, Chamonix, with pretty much saying, Oom, vat my hand en kom in 'n vennootskap om hierdie land weer te bou. En wat ons doen vandag, let's vergeet wat is in die verlede, omdat as jy 'n kind van die Here is, Romeine 8 vers 1 sê, daar is geen veroordeling as jy 'n kind van die Here is. Maar kom ons skep 'n nuwe toekoms vandag. En kom ons vorentoe gaan. So let's join hands today to build a new future. And that's where I believe as South Africans, we have a one-up on the rest of the world, where we've been through a tough situation in the past, but we've come through it, we've learned from it, and we're moving forward together. And a lot of the world can learn that. I mean, I've had, Australians in my church come up to me and say to me, hey, sorry about what happened with you guys in apartheid and all of that. And I say, hey, let's get one thing straight here. Yes, apartheid was bad, but we've learned through it. We've had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We've put everything out there. We've forgiven and we've moved on. And I can't say the same for what they've done to their native people, because I've met a lot of Aboriginal pastors that are still very despondent and disappointed with where the country is. And maybe they can learn from us. Maybe we can be the catalyst. Maybe as South Africans, we can join hands and bring that unity in Australia as well, and say that we gotta put things behind, but we can't just cover them up. That TRC that we had was brilliant. It allowed things to get out in the open that were hidden, and that's also biblical. The Bible says, "Don't put things in the dark; bring them out in the light." So yeah, I believe as South Africans, we've got a big role to play wherever we are in the world.
Yeah. Well, South Africans or any other nationality, it is that you need to be who you are and be brave in what it is that God put you there. And you will know it's, God will provide whatever it is where he puts you. So if he doesn't put the brave people there, he puts the people there and he makes them brave. Essentially, he gives what you need in that situation. So I wanted to just go a little bit back to your journey then from New Zealand. So you went from South Africa to New Zealand, then back to South Africa because of the job that you were offered. Did you have citizenship at that stage then already, New Zealand citizenship?
Yeah, so I completed my teacher training in 2004. I started working as a teacher in New Zealand. And with that qualification, I ended up getting my residency. So I got my residency April 2004. And how's this? God is so good. We were reading this verse recently, John chapter 6, when there was a storm and Jesus got onto the boat of the disciples, and the disciples willingly brought him on. And the Bible says immediately they were taken from the sea onto the land. And this is what God can do for you. When you put your trust in God, when you welcome Jesus onto your boat, he can make things change immediately. We got our residency in April 2004. And because we had been in the country legally for more than 3 years, we qualified for citizenship. That same year, we got our residency. Within a few months, we got our New Zealand citizenship. And the people that mocked us, the people that ridiculed us, because, you get that wherever you are. And, that's why I say, when you put your trust in God, I like what Corrie ten Boom said, old Dutch Tanny. She said, we can always trust an unknown future into the hands of a known God. Ons kan 'n onbekende toekoms in die hande van 'n bekende God vertrou. So don't ever give up, or you'll get and the people that put us down, we're our own fellow South Africans, mocking me and saying, hey, how can you bring your family to New Zealand when you're on a student visa and a work permit? And I had heard from God. And that's why I say, when God gives a vision, he makes the provision. So never, ever give up and doubt that this God can make things change just like that.
What was your age when you left South Africa to New Zealand? How old were you?
I was 25.
Okay. And your wife is about the same age as you?
She was 4 years younger than me.
And then with the 8-month-old daughter.
8-month-old, yeah.
Daughter.
Yeah.
Yes.
She's now back. She's with us from Pretoria. She came to visit, and she's got a 2-year-old daughter. So I'm an opa.
Oh,
Yeah,
sweet.
yeah.
That's beautiful. So at 25, you left South Africa. Then you stayed in New Zealand until you were 30. How long?
12 years.
12
So
years.
I would have been 37.
And then 7 years in South Africa. Is that
7
right?
years in Pretoria, the Hoofstad. Yeah.
Okay, so you spent a lot of time in the Kalklig with all the Springboks and the All Blacks and all the really cool people who also thankfully through your move to New Zealand you found God, because as you said, you grew up being a Hindu and then you had to move to New Zealand to
Well,
learn.
actually, I became a Christian before I left to New Zealand. In 97, in 97, I became a Christian.
Oh, okay.
But actually, 94 I became a Christian, and then I got married in 97, and then immigrated in 2000. What I like to say to people that as an Indian in South Africa, you're not regarded as black, you're regarded as half black.
Yeah.
But because I lived in New Zealand for 14 years, I'm no longer half black, I'm now all black. So that's a completion in the journey.
And you've got the passport to show it.
You got the passport, absolutely, yeah.
You don't have the skin color to show it, you've got the passport to show it.
Yeah.
So then you went back to South Africa, and your wife, who said, I hope you accepted that position, now happily moved back officially with you to Pretoria, I assume?
Yeah.
And your daughter, what did she say to you? Dad, are you crazy? I'm staying in New Zealand, or I'm coming with?
Well, the kids at the time would have been around, 12. I only got 5 children. So at the time I had 4 girls. I had 4 daughters. So they would have been 12, 10, 6. And then we had a baby that was 1 year old. So 4 daughters. And when I got back to South Africa, the laat lammertjie, die seun was gebore. So you see, I had to go back to South Africa to get the son. So after 4 girls, we ended up getting the son in South Africa, 2014. And it was a time when I wrote Jannie de Beer's book. Now, Jannie de Beer, he kicked the world record 5 drop goals. So we called his book High Five. And when I wrote the book, our 5th child was born.
Oh,
and my wife says, thank God he wasn't writing Alibaba and the 40 Thieves,
Oh, you've got a very brave wife as well to go through 5 pregnancies. We have 4 children, and so we have 3 boys, and then we had a girl. We're almost the opposite
Other way around.
to your situation. And yes, it takes a lot of courage for somebody, especially in a country where you're not amongst your normal support structures, to have more children than, well, to have any children for starters, because children it's hard work, as you know. And the more children you have, the harder it becomes. So if you don't have Opa and Oma and Ooms and Tannies and everybody to support you with looking after your children, or like we have in South Africa, a lot of, let's call it cheap labor, where it's much more affordable to pay somebody to look after your children, then having more than 2 kids in another country is a brave woman. So well done on your wife for doing that. Now you're back in South Africa and you've got your 5 children. What happened after that to make the move to New Zealand? What was the thinking or the happenings around you?
So at the end of 2018, my eldest daughter had finished her matric as such. And then my second daughter was getting to year 11 or grade 11 in South Africa. So they were going to look to do their university. So, because being New Zealand citizens, we felt that a New Zealand qualification, and having worked at the University of Pretoria, I knew that, having a New Zealand qualification stands up better internationally than a South African qualification. So, and we felt that, the country was not like what it was when we first got there in 2012. they started going back into load shedding, and we never experienced load shedding in our life before until that time in 2018. And we were like, what is happening? And, South Africans were like, oh, this is normal. Don't worry, the power will come on now. And we're like, no, this is not normal. Having lived in New Zealand, we knew it was not normal. And that's the sad part where, in South Africa, they've just learned to roll with it and think it's okay. But when you lived outside, you realize that's not normal. And it started getting really wound up. At that time, it was level 2, level 3. And we realized, we said, nah, you know what, we got New Zealand citizenship, and we're going to go back to New Zealand. We can't stand this, and we can't live like this. So that's the main reason we left, was to give the kids again a better opportunity. And we thought South Africa would do that. But for us personally, I know for others it may be different. But I even wrote that in my book. I wrote an article saying, "Die gras is nie groener aan die ander kant altyd nie," saying that, when you leave South Africa, it doesn't mean things are better on that side. But obviously, having experienced what I experienced in 2018 and stuff like that, and where the country is now, my view has changed. That I was back in South Africa in September. I did a few talks again and stuff, and I mean, it was hectic. It's just now not just the power, but the power has affected the water supply, the sewage. I don't have to talk much. Your viewers know what the situation is like there, and for me, that's not normal. So that's pretty much what made us move back to New Zealand, and now back to Australia.
So you moved to New Zealand and you went back to teaching, is that right?
That's right. I went back to teaching. So I did that, and then I also got a pastor role. I did a pastor role there. There was an interim role just between pastors to help out a Baptist church there in Auckland. And through that experience, I got an opportunity to pastor a church in New South Wales here in Australia. So we came over because of the lockdown. We couldn't come over in the beginning of 2020. So I eventually came over in November 2020. I was there for 2 years. And I also got back into teaching. I started doing some casual teaching or relief teaching. And then with that, we visited Perth. I got asked to speak at a few churches and schools. So we came over in August and September, and I really liked it. I felt that, this is a good place to be. I invited my wife over, or we actually arranged for my wife, Jolene, to visit the place, and she liked it as well. And here we are, made the move in December. And I'm also back to teaching now. So I'm actually teaching in a Christian school here in a place called Mandurah. So I'm teaching at a Christian school here, and I'm loving it because, I needed the security as well, because the speaking and all of that is nice, but it's not consistent income. And I just needed a break from pastoring, because that also can be very draining on you. So I'm enjoying the teaching. I'm back in the classroom. I'm teaching a year 5 class, 10-year-olds, and good to be surrounded by, fellow Christians in a very supportive environment in a Christian school here in Mandurah, south of Perth.
Do you also live in Mandurah?
No, actually, I live in a lovely place on the beach called Secret Harbour. Why do you think my tan is so good? It gives us a chance to work on our tan. So I'm living in a beautiful suburb. Coming from Durban, it's sort of nostalgic, because the surf reminds us of my hometown, Durban. Yeah. The only thing we're missing is a lekker Durban bunny chow. But, my wife,
surely you can do that on the side as well, Myan.
Oh, yeah. That's
what you do between 2 and 3 in the mornings? Maybe you can open a restaurant.
Yeah, well, Jolene makes a lovely bunny chow. Okay.
So, okay, I know Secret Harbour very well, and I've got my best friend in Australia lives in Secret Harbour. So it's a beautiful spot.
Tell her come over for a bunny chow.
Yeah, they should. We have to make an arrangement here so that you and I can meet in person. I want to try that bunny chow myself. We love a good curry. But yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your move between New Zealand and Australia. Why? I know you got an opportunity to come to Australia, but why did you decide to take it up? Was it what made you change countries? Was there more to it than just the job?
Oh, absolutely. What had happened was in 2019. So the plan was, in going back to New Zealand, I could still regularly visit South Africa and do my talks, because I had regular speaking with banks, insurance companies, churches and schools and mines. I did a lot of talks at the mines. So one of my talks when I got back to South Africa in April 2019, it was at a spur or a spur. It was a mana on bait, 5 o'clock in the morning. How South Africans love to get up early in the morning. And when I did the talk, there was a guy, a prophet. He comes up to me and he shows me, he says to me, I see a picture of a 747 landing. So I said, oh, okay, that's good. And then he sends me the picture of the 747. So I'm like, yeah, no problem, all good. Thank you very much. He sends me on WhatsApp. So that was 2019, April. And then we go through the lockdowns in New Zealand around January 2020. February lockdown, March lockdown 2020. And I bring out the phone and I'm thinking to myself, you know what, hey, I'm just not feeling at peace in New Zealand. There are a lot of changes in New Zealand as well, the government and all of that. And I just felt, you know what, maybe I should look elsewhere. And I'm like, which country do I look for? And I'm playing with my phone and I come across this WhatsApp message. And the 747 picture that this guy sent me, which was oblivious to me at the time, was a Qantas 747 with Spirit of Australia written on it. And it was like, bang, sort of like that new Muckle Nuke sign. And that's when I got that message, you know what, Australia. And literally, I spoke to a pastor friend of mine that was pastoring in Brisbane. And I said to him, which website do I go to look for, jobs for pastoring? And then he told me what to do. And literally, Shamini, the first job that I applied for as a pastor and as a teacher, I got the both jobs. So I got a teacher role in a Christian school in Canberra. And I got the pastor job in this church in New South Wales. And then between the two, long story short, I said, I want to take the pastoring job. And that's how I ended up in Australia. I really believe it was a call from God. Qantas, the Spirit of Australia, spoke to me.
And has it been what you thought it would be, having lived in New Zealand for many years as well? Was Australia I don't know what you thought it would be, but how did it map out for you?
Well, again, having had the experience with God earlier in South Africa and New Zealand and all of that, our trust and our hope was in what God was going to do. And coming over, to answer your question, it was exactly in the Lord's plan and His will. We really enjoyed it. We appreciate being here, and we can see that for this chapter of our lives, we're walking in the center of where God wants us to be. And I said it before, and God gives a vision, He makes a provision. Where He guides, He provides. So even how we came into contact, through a mutual friend, where in the book I speak about it and I say, Proverbs 18:16, a man's gift make rooms for himself and brings him before great people. So you don't have to beat a drum and jump up and down and say, pick me, because I say it, I didn't go looking for rugby. Rugby found me. Of all the countries in the world God sent me to, I said, God's got a sense of humor. He sends me to a country, New Zealand, waar hulle godsdienst is rugby. The national religion of the land is rugby. And that's where I had to learn rugby. I had to change my negative attitude towards Afrikaans and rugby so that God could send me back to South Africa and do what I did there. And that's prepared me for where I'm now in Australia. Like I said, being in Perth, especially with all the South Africans around, man, it's being back in South Africa. But at the same time, the culture and the vibe and everything here is really lovely. Really lovely.
And there's some beautiful churches as well in Perth, as I know you've experienced by now. Lots of South Africans, but just some really gorgeous places where I came to Australia as a Christian. I've always grown up. I've been fortunate that I come from a Christian family and I have Christian parents, but it really wasn't until I moved to Australia as well that my Christianity stepped up a few notches. There's something about, I think it's the survival as well in it, and lots of searching, why am I here? Why is life doing this to me? And that has just made it's just made my relationship with God that much stronger. And I've spent most of my Australian life in Perth, in the churches in Perth, and I can say to you that it's a fabulous community to be in the, well, anywhere in Perth, but especially in the churches. There are some awesome people. So how have you found living in the Perth heat? I know that you're in the car.
You
And
can see I'm in the car. I'm like in sauna. I don't want to open the windows because it's good. I'm burning off some calories. I told you I've got a full house because my daughter and my granddaughter at home, and then Jolene's mom was in South Africa for 2 months on holiday, and she couldn't fly back to Auckland. She lives in Auckland because the airport was flooded, so she was able to divert to Perth. So that was good. So the full house plus with the 2 dogs. I'm in the car talking to
we
you.
want all of them on the screen. Okay, we want to speak to all of them.
Yeah, we can arrange that. I'll send you a photo. I'll send you a photo.
Yes, we'll add some photos on here as footage so that people can see. But tell me a little bit about the heat, because you've moved from New Zealand to Australia. Now you live in one of the hottest places in Australia, almost, Perth. How are you doing with the 40-degree heat?
And the place we lived in, New South Wales, was 1,000 meters above sea level. So it was also quite a cold place. It was like Bloemfontein weather, -6, -7 in the winter, and during the summer it gets hot. But here in Perth, I mean, if I could liken it to a place that I visited, it's like Dubai. It's intense heat during the day, but at night, it cools down a little bit, but not as humid as Durban, or Brisbane for that matter, but very, very intense. It's striking hot. Yeah.
And have you got all your children with you in Perth now, or where are your children? Because how old are they now?
No, it's okay. So my eldest says she lives in Pretoria, so she's with us on holiday at the moment. She'll be 23 next month, and then I've got my 20-year-old. My 20-year-old's name is Waiora. That's a Maori name. I'm very grateful to the Maori people for helping giving me that direction, to giving me that checkup from the neck up to eliminate my stinking thinking towards Afrikaans and rugby. So we named her Waiora. She's 20. Then I've got Tabitha, she's 16. Zipporah, that's 12. And then the Lat Lamarki, the Sien Jethro, he's 8 years old. And then we've got the 2 dogs. I wouldn't be South African if I didn't have a Jack Russell. Because, I was so impressed with that dog, because most of the farmers that I had, I was friends with in South Africa, they'll have the big bull mastiffs or the Boer bulls, and then they'll have these Jack Russells there with them.
Did you so you bought your Jack Russell in South Africa while you were living there, and then moved in all of the dogs out to New Zealand?
We bought the Jack Russell in New South Wales, and then we got some doodle, coodle, moodle, I don't know what it is, that my wife and the kids bought here in Perth. So we got a New South Wales dog, and we got a WA dog here.
Yeah, that makes the moving around a little bit cheaper if you don't move your animals with you all the time as well, because that can be almost as expensive as moving a person from one country to another.
Yeah.
So Myan, where do you see your future? What do you think? Do you feel like you're going to go to another country after Australia, or you want to go back to New Zealand or back to South Africa? I know God can work in mysterious ways and he can place us, but where does Myan see yourself in the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, very good question. I think, coming to Perth, and this is Myan, not God speaking with what he wants us to do, but I can see us really seeing out the rest of our years here in Perth, if that's what God wills. We'd like to live here, because also the convenience of being able to get back to South Africa to visit, and we've got a whole lot of family there. So living in Perth just makes it so much easier. The travel time is not as much as being in New Zealand or other places in Australia. Thank God they got a direct flight now. I don't know how long that's going to last. I just saw the Perth Fontaine Facebook. Apparently apparently that's going to stop in March or something. But even then too, it's so much closer to South Africa and the rest of the world for us, because I still do quite a lot of talks in the United Kingdom. So being able to travel from Perth is much more convenient. So to answer your question, hopefully we we end up staying here and getting more.
What identity do you think your children see themselves as?
Interesting.
Identity.
Interesting question, and that's where I put this book together, because I was asked the question on New Zealand TV when I wrote my book, Born a Hindu, Die a Hindu, which was my sort of testimony of coming from a Hindu to a Christian. And the interviewer said to me, he said, "Hey, you're born in South Africa, you're a fourth generation Indian, and now you've got New Zealand citizenship. So which citizenship do you hold to?" And immediately I said to him, my citizenship is in heaven. And that for me is what roots and grounds my identity, that above all of these nationalities that I can hold to, that I'm first and foremost a child of God, a follower of Jesus Christ. And that anchors me in that firm foundation. But in saying that, my children, we can relate to when we love eating our curries. We love watching our Bollywood with the subtitles. And at the same time, they love their Brendan paper. They love, the Juanita Duplessis songs. They love their Boerewors. They love their biltong. And at the same time, they love the All Blacks. They love New Zealand. So if I could liken it to an Indian dish, they like a biryani, a bit of rice, a bit of meat and vegetables. So it's a bit of everything. And I guess I'd like to think that they see themselves as global citizens, as people that can fit in. I mean, they've seen their parents lead the way in taking them to different countries, but in grounding themselves, knowing that they must never ever be ashamed or feel minderwaardig with who they are. We are proud of being South African. We're proud of being Indian. We're proud of being Kiwis. We're proud of living in Australia. But more importantly, we children of the Most High God, and that's important.
Yes, that's ultimately the biggest identity that we have and can share and can show to the world. Your daughter, though, your 23-year-old, why is she still in South Africa?
Well, she's decided to make a life for herself there. The father of her child, they're living there. So that's a choice that she's made. And obviously, she's an adult, and she feels that's where she's most connected to, South Africa. Because, she did come with us to New Zealand in 2019.
Okay.
But she chose to go back to South Africa and settle there. And like I said, I didn't mention it, but that's one of the reasons why we also looked to go back to South Africa in 2012, or when the opportunity came to stay there, was to give the kids an opportunity to grow up in the culture that we grew up in as South African Indians. And we're so glad that they did, because they got to meet our family, they got to experience the places that we grew up in, and then just the South African culture. So this is where, fast forward to today, they are so comfortable being among South Africans in church and fellowshipping at the church here, and not missing out or being in the dark when we talk about tennis biscuits and Mari biscuits.
Milk that.
Milk that.
So many Afrikaans and South Africans in Australia as well that you don't really have it anywhere.
And the malva puddings and all of that.
Oh, yum.
I think I earned the malva pudding sitting here with all the I'm doing. So
definitely did. I feel so sorry for you in the heat there. Feel free to start the car and have the aircon going. I'm sitting in my air conditioning because we're having a 37-degree day here today. So I'm like, also your other children that are still with you.
Mm-hmm.
What are their intentions? Do you think they want to travel the world? Because now that they have New Zealand passports, essentially the world is open to them. They can easily move around. Or do you think they would also like to go back to South Africa still?
I don't think the 4 children that are with us, but I know that my 20-year-old Waiora, she's of the age where she can pretty much do what she wants.
Mm.
But she's chosen to be with us in Australia because they came back with us in April. We also visited South Africa in April last year, and they were like, "Thank God we don't live here anymore." That's what they said. So they couldn't see themselves going back to South Africa at this stage, and that's why they're with us.
Yes.
So yeah, they're happy to be here in Australia. They love the schooling. They love the
Are they at
freedom.
the same school than where you are?
Yeah, so my two youngest ones are with, and they're loving it. It's a strong Christian culture there. So my son's in year 3, my daughter is in year 7, and I'm teaching year 5. So yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, and have you applied for Australian citizenship? Or permanent residency? Do you think you will do that? I know as New Zealanders you can stay in Australia, but is that something that you think you do?
Not at this stage. Obviously, I think we need to be here, I think, what, 5 years or something like that before we can look at it. And I mean, if we did, then we'd have to give up one of the two, New Zealand or South African. I don't know whether we'd be able to have 3 citizenships. and I'm a bit sentimental at this stage. I still keep my South African citizenship until I hear different.
Yeah.
So
yes, tricky.
And I'm not saying no.
Yeah.
But with the New Zealand citizenship, we do have a bit more sort of freedom and benefits than another citizenship. We don't need a work permit or anything like that. We have access to the Medicare and that sort of thing. So
2 more questions. The one is, how hard is it to decide which team to support when you're watching the rugby? Because you've got the Tri-Nations, if they play, where's your patriotism?
The good thing is that when the All Blacks play the box, I can never lose. I can always quickly. That's where my South African friends call me a draad sitter. I'm always sitting on the fence. And, I'm grateful with the friendships that I've had with the All Blacks, especially the late Inga the winger Tuigumala, because it was through him that God got me into rugby, and through him, he opened the doors for me with all the other players in the team and stuff like that there. But then having worked with the Lions rugby team, and those guys when they were down and out, and forging relationships with them, and then the other rugby unions, and then writing Pierre's book, because when I wrote Pierre's book, Pierre's piece in 2011, the World Cup in New Zealand, I was able to travel with the team, and that's when I met, the other players from the other unions in South Africa. So the likes of Brian Habana, Willem Alberts, and John de Villiers, who wrote the foreword. John de Villiers wrote the last word to my latest book, and Morne wrote the foreword, Morne Stein. So it's just a matter of hearing from God and finding out where to next. But just enjoying where we are at this moment in time, and see what comes up.
Well, as you say, you can't really lose, and I know Australia is not quite as high up for you as New Zealand.
Oh, definitely not. Yeah. I mean, I have more of a loyalty to South Africa because and that came through New Zealand, because sadly, growing up in the time that we grew up in South Africa, we supported every team that South Africa played against. But going to New Zealand, that's when God changed my heart to say to me, why are you supporting every team that plays against South Africa? And the answer was because of unforgiveness. And that's when I had to learn to forgive and to move on. And that's where it all started for me, on that marae in New Zealand. And now, I would wear, I spoke at a church here 2 weeks ago. I wore my All Black shirt. And then I did a talk at another church last week, a men's breakfast, and I wore my Springbok shirt. So it's because of my personal relationship with the players and the testimony that I have with them. First choice, I will wear a Springbok shirt, and I will say I'm a Springbok supporter. But obviously, the All Blacks as well will always be close to my heart. The kids, they support the All Blacks because of Uncle Inga and the friends that we made with DJ Forbes and the guys. So they support the All Blacks. But my boy Jethro, I managed to get him onto the side of the Springboks. Yeah.
Sweet. So yeah, you're almost like a malva pudding. You've got all sorts in your family, all supporting all different.
Yeah.
And then my last question, Myan, is what is the best thing for you about living in Australia?
You know, it's similar to what a lot of South Africans will attest to. You know, it's just the freedom, the safety, the security aspect. You know, to be able to not worry about whether someone's going to break into your house or you're going to get hijacked when you're driving on the road. And you know, as a father and as a husband, that's you know a priority. So that's a great part about being in Australia, is that you have that bit more safety, and being in Australia, you know, people don't look down upon you based on the car that you drive, the house that you live in, and the job that you do or don't do. And again, I'm generalizing, but that's just on the top of my head. That's just some of the benefits that just come to mind.
It's lovely. If our viewers would like to learn more about Myan or get some of your books and read up on this juicy, beautiful writing that you do from the heart, and you're just so well versed in the language, how you use words and make something beautiful come out of it, where can they find more of you, Myan?
Well, I'm on Gesik's book, Facebook. So they can always find me on Facebook. And then my website, I'll send you the links for that, just myans.org. Yeah, they can find me on that there. And then I'll give you my contact details. You're welcome to put it up. I'm on WhatsApp as well. So
Awesome.
they can get me on that. So yeah.
Lovely. Thank you so much for taking your time and for sweating it all out for us on the episode today.
There you go. There you go. I can finally take a breather.
You can go in and tell your mother-in-law, hey, I can now, it's your mother-in-law, hey, it's not your mother.
Mother-in-law, yeah.
Mother-in-law, I can now eat all your bunny chows that you've made me tonight and I won't even blink.
Won't feel bad. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your story and how beautiful it is to hear how God has actually worked in so many ways with you, and how you've listened to God, where he would lead you to places where you didn't expect to go, people to mix with you didn't expect that you would mix with them, and how he has brought your life into this fruition. It's beautiful to see how your tree has blossomed, and it's just thank you for enlightening our viewers.
The plans and the dreams God has for you are unstoppable.
Absolutely. You're living proof.
God bless you.
Thank you,
so
Myan.
much.
Take care.
All right, my friend, I hope you enjoyed watching this episode. Now, remember, if you want to learn about the 3 biggest mistakes that migrants make and be let in on the 3 biggest secrets that they also do, the ones that are successful, you need to make sure that you get onto our webinar this week. chamonixtv.com.au/register will provide you the options to pick a time and come back and learn also how you can land your ideal job in Australia as soon as possible. Thanks for coming back each week. I hope you enjoyed it and that you will hit the subscribe button below so that you are notified whenever we release a new episode. Okay, my friend, I'll see you in the next one.